The bullet skimmed his shoulder, tearing through fabric and flesh as Nathan threw himself between her and danger, his own body a barrier of instinct and sacrifice. Blood seeped dark and steady into the threads of his security uniform. "I'm just the gatekeeper," he whispered, voice strained, as their eyes locked. Elise Blackwood reached out with trembling fingers, her palm brushing the side of his face. The first time in 7 long, desolate years that a woman's touch had reached him. Morning broke over a city still wrapped in shadows. In a modest apartment tucked away on the east side, Nathan Miller opened his eyes before the alarm could declare another day. At 42, time had carved his story into the creases around his eyes. Tales of solitude, regret, and burdens born in silence. The apartment reflected his life with austere honesty. Bare walls, a bed without softness, a dresser that held more routine than sentiment, and on the nightstand, one photo, a young girl, smiling faintly with his eyes. Nothing else remained to tell the story of his life. No evidence of laughter or warmth or dreams. He moved like a man rehearsing survival. His morning ritual played out with rigid precision, coffee black as midnight and bitter as memory. 50 push-ups on a threadbare carpet, a 3-minute shower, not a second more. The mirror offered back a face that belonged to someone older, someone wearier than the calendar claimed. Salt and pepper stubble shadowed his jaw, eyes dulled by battles both fought and forfeited dot in the small adjacent room. He laid out clothes for Sophie, his 12-year-old daughter. She hadn't spoken more than a few syllables in weeks, ever since her mother's accident. That Nathan had missed because he was working a double shift to keep the lights on. The silence between them had only thickened. "Math test today?" he asked gently as they drove through traffic in his rusted sedan. Sophie nodded, her gaze fixed beyond the window, beyond the world. Her silence didn't scream, it whispered, heavy and haunted. He watched her walk away, backpack sagging on one shoulder, each step carrying a weight that no child should have to carry. They were like the survivors shipwrecked on an island, close enough to see each other, yet unable to reach across the wreckage between them. Nathan arrived at the Westlake, estate town enclave of privilege and perfection, and slid wordlessly into his security booth. At the main gate, among his colleagues, he was the silent one, the ex-Marine who never shared war stories, the widower who never left early, never called out sick, reliable, forgettable. A fixture no different from the cameras or keypads he monitored dot from his little windowed cage. He watched lives untouched by lost rolled past and luxury sedans, lawyers, executives, people with schedules and spa appointments, people who had never stared down the barrel of despair. He opened gates, checked IDs, and faded into the background. But that evening, as dusk bled into storm clouds, something shifted. A black Mercedes lingered just beyond the center range of the gate. Its driver remained shadowed behind tinted glass. Nathan couldn't see a face, but something about the positioning, the hesitation rippled old instincts to the surface. He noted it in the log, dismissed it. What was the point of worrying about shadows? He didn't yet know that the shadow would soon collide with the very bones of his past, waking parts of him long buried with his wife. Rain thundered from the heavens. That night, drenching the estate in sheets of cold fury, Nathan took a night shift for a sick colleague. The storm had knocked out sections of the estate's power, including the automatic gate, so he stood in the downpour, soaked to the skin, checking IDs by hand like a soldier back on a hostile checkpoint. A silver Audi rolled to a stop. Wipers clawed at the windshield. The window lowered just enough for a hand to slip out an ID card. "Elise Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and composed, but under that control, something flickered, a quiet urgency, a faltering mask. Nathan hadn't heard her name before. According to the ID, she was married to Richard Blackwood, the name attached to the empty mansion up on Lakeview Drive. He'd never seen it occupied. "I'll have to call this in," Nathan said, noting the subtle tension in her grip on the wheel. Her eyes flicked toward the rearview mirror, fear not yet spoken, but loud in its silence. "Please," she said, her voice cracking just enough to betray something. My husband is expecting me. Protocol demanded confirmation, but the look in her eyes, that tight-lipped fear, made him hesitate. Then headlights flared behind her, the black Mercedes, speeding toward the gate. "Let me through," she said. Again, lower this time, urgent. Every cell in Nathan's body went rigid. Something deep, instinctual, broke free. He reached for the manual override. The gates creaked open. He waved her through, but the Mercedes surged forward, trying to slide in behind her. Without thought, Nathan stepped forward, planting himself between the vehicle and the narrowing gap. Tires shrieked as the car halted inches from his legs. Two men emerged, tailored suits, cold eyes. "Clean, efficient danger, estate policy," Nathan said, calm but immovable. "One vehicle per authorization." "We're with Mrs. Blackwood," the driver said, his tone indifferent. "Then you'll need her to confirm that," Nathan replied, hand resting subtly near the taser on his belt. A charged silence followed, the kind before something bad happens or DOES and single quotes T. Eventually, the men retreated, backed their car away, but didn't leave. Nathan called it in and returned to his booth. Rain still falling, heart still pounding. An hour later, light exploded from the Lakeview mansion. His radio crackled. Possible intruder at the Blackwood residence. By the time Nathan arrived, the front door hung open like a warning. One window shattered, taser drawn. He stepped into the darkened house. Security. He called out in the study. He found her, Elise, a phone in one hand, the other pressing a bloodied cloth to her temple. Her mask of control had slipped, but only just. "They broke in through the terrace," she said, voice steady despite the tremble in her limbs. "I triggered the alarm. They ran." Nathan swept the house with quiet efficiency, clearing the space, confirming safety. Then he turned back to her. "The police are on their way," he said gently. "May I?" She nodded, allowing him to examine her cut. It was shallow, but angry. He retrieved a first aid kit from the guest bathroom and began cleaning the wound, his fingers steady even as hers trembled faintly. "You're good at this," she murmured. "Marines." He replied simply, "And now you guard gates." It wasn't condescension. It was curiosity, something deeper, something that wanted to understand. Nathan didn't answer. The police arrived. Reports were filed. The official story, a failed burglary attempt. But Nathan saw more. The clean break-in, the disabled cameras. It had all been to precise. Professionals. As the officers prepared to leave, Elise pulled him aside. "Those men, they weren't with me. I saw your eyes," he said. "You were afraid." For the first time, something shifted in her. The armor cracked, just a little. "My husband travels often," she said quietly. "I don't usually come here alone." "Then why night?" She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely more than a breath. "Sometimes we just need somewhere to breathe." The words settled between them heavy, intimate, unfinished. In that quiet space, something unspoken passed from one soul to another, to people stitched together by scars, by solitude, by a longing neither had dared to name. And maybe, just maybe, the gatekeeper and the ghost behind the glass had both taken their first breath in years. The police officer's voice was professional, but laced with subtle concern. "It's not wise to stay here alone." Elise nodded faintly, her eyes shadowed beneath the soft glow of the entryway chandelier. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed a number from memory, one she hadn't called with genuine trust in a very long time. When the line connected, her voice shifted, becoming something else, measured, polished, careful. It was the voice of a woman who had learned to perform calm under pressure, to wear grace like a second skin. "Yes, everything's fine," she murmured. "They're sending someone, but not until morning." When she ended the call, the mask slipped just for a second. Then she turned to Nathan with the estate security. "Consider keeping someone on site until then, by protocol." Nathan should have radioed for a replacement and returned to his post at the gate. That was the rule. But tonight, the rules bent under the weight of something unspoken, A quiet look in her eyes, one he couldn't unsee, a vulnerability he recognized far too well. "I'll stay," he said into his radio. Relief softened her posture. Barely perceptible, but real, the night grew deeper and colder. Inside, Elise sat curled in the corner of a vast, too-perfect living room, her laptop casting flickers of white light on her face. Nathan walked the perimeter, alert but lost in thought. Their paths crossed only occasionally passing glances. In the hallway, shared silences in the kitchen, but in each moment lingered a subtle recognition. Two souls who learned to live quietly among ghosts. Days passed. Nathan returned to his routine. The booth, the gates, the coffee, the silence, but something inside him had shifted. He found himself watching for Elise's car, counting the days. She didn't come, telling himself it was just concern over the unresolved break-in, just diligence. Nothing more. Sophie noticed. "You seem different," she said one morning, her voice hesitant, but clear, the most words she'd spoken in weeks. Nathan blinked. "Different how?" She shrugged, retreating back into silence, but her words lingered, pressing quietly against his mind as the hours passed. Up at the Blackwood mansion, security upgrades were in full swing. New cameras, reinforced windows. Nathan was assigned to oversee the installations. It gave him reason to be near Elise, reason he told himself was strictly professional. She was 38. He'd learned, Yale-educated, a successful corporate attorney, despite the wealth her marriage had afforded her. She carried herself with elegant precision, hair always perfect, speech always measured, presence always composed. But Nathan recognized it all for what it was, armor. On the third day, he arrived early and found her in the garden, barefoot in the dewy grass, dressed down in jeans and a linen blouse, her hands caked with dirt as she worked at a long-neglected rose bed. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, a smudge of soil streaked across her cheek. She looked more alive in that moment than he'd ever seen her. "My mother planted these," she said without looking up, "before my father sold the property to Richard." Nathan knelt beside her, gently cradling a withered stem between calloused fingers. "This one might be too far gone," he said quietly. "I don't believe that," she replied. "Sometimes things just need patience and the right kind of attention." Their eyes met, and something in Nathan's chest shifted, something he'd kept locked away behind years of mourning. At detachment. He offered to help. And so, side by side, they dug their hands into the earth, the silence between them softening. Conversation grew more natural, more human. She asked about Sophie, and without intending to, Nathan shared more than he ever had before, about Megan's accident, the long silences that followed, the guilt that refused to loosen its grip. Elise didn't offer platitudes. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened, deeply, and for the first time in years, Nathan felt seen. In return, she shared fragments of her own life, her marriage to Richard Blackwood, 20 years her senior. "He was my mentor first," she said, voice caught between nostalgia and quiet sadness. "He saw potential in me when no one else did." But her tone betrayed the rest, the unspoken truth that what began as guidance had become a cage. In the following weeks, they continued to cross each other's orbits in quiet, meaningful ways. Nathan, breaking a small protocol, brought coffee from the cafe outside the estate instead of the bitter office brew. Elise, in turn, loaned him books from the mansion's forgotten library, gardening guides, poetry that spoke of healing and rebirth. Then one evening, a call came that pulled Nathan violently back to reality. Sophie. Panic attack, her first in months. He found her curled in the nurse's office, pale and trembling, her breath caught in shallow loops. He drove her home in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping guilt like a lifeline. As he sat at the kitchen table later, the house still and dim, his phone buzzed. A text from Elise, a simple question about the security system. He didn't answer. A second message followed. "Is everything all right?" And in a moment of weakness or maybe need, he called. Sophie had a rough day. He admitted Elise's voice, when it came, was soft, Do you want to talk about it? And suddenly, Nathan found himself spilling the truth, his deepest fear. That night, I was supposed to pick Megan up. There was an incident at work. I asked her to drive herself. If I'd just been there, Nathan, Elise said gently, we can't be everywhere. We can't protect everyone we love, no matter how hard we try. Her words held something personal. Liv died, and when he asked, she told him, we lost a child, a stillbirth, 3 years ago. After that, Richard changed. He buried himself in work, and I became very good at pretending everything was fine. That moment Tra and Unguarded wove a bridge between them, not romantic, not yet, but human and real. They began meeting outside the estate, casual, quiet places, a coffee shop halfway between, a farmer's market where Nathan brought Sophie. Elisa's presence seemed to lift the fog around the girl, not by much, but enough to notice dark colors seemed brighter to Nathan, leaves more vivid, the sky more infinite. Sophie's occasional smiles felt less like aching reminders and more like fragile victories. But not everything had softened. The black Mercedes began reappearing, lurking, watching. Elisa's eyes held traces of fear again. Nathan said nothing, not wanting to stir the peace she'd found, until the night had shattered dot at 2 a.m. His phone rang. Elisa's voice was panicked. Someone's here, she whispered. I think someone's inside. Nathan didn't hesitate. He didn't think about protocol. He just drove. He found the mansion undisturbed, but Elise was pale, shaking, and in her trembling hand, she held a note Dot had been left on her pillow. He knows. Nathan's blood ran cold. We have to call the police, he said. No, she whispered, eyes wide. You don't understand. Richard isn't just powerful, he's dangerous, especially when he feels threatened. Threatened by what? Her eyes met his, unwavering. By anything he can't control, by anyone who sees the real me, not the version he built. The air between them was thick with the weight of truth, that their connection tentative, honest, healing had drawn a line in the sand, and Richard, from wherever he watched, had seen it. As the first light of dawn touched the edges of the estate, they sat in silence on the terrace. Not lovers, not yet, but something just as fragile. Elise reached across the table, her hand found his, and for once, Nathan didn't pull away. That morning, for the first time in 3 years, Nathan called it sick. Something had begun, and neither of them could go back. After leaving Sophie at school, a goodbye marked not by words, but by the faintest nod between father and daughter. Nathan steered his aging sedan toward the outskirts of town, beyond the suburbs, past where the roads cracked and the street lamps flickered, sat a forgotten storage unit that held more than boxes. It held his former life. The rusted roll-up door groaned as it opened, revealing dust-swept silence and shadows thick with memory. Beneath the weathered tarp lay fragments of the man he once was, military commendations, tactical gear meticulously packed, and a laptop wrapped in an old field jacket, artifacts of a life before loss, before guilt, before the man in the mirror became a ghost with a badge. He plugged in the laptop, his fingers, long unpracticed, remembered the password before his mind did. The screen flickered to life. Nathan had once been more than a gatekeeper. Long before he exchanged battlefields for parking lots, he had been a strategist, a security consultant trusted with secrets most men would never dare to know. He'd buried those skills the moment his life fell apart deliberately, like a man lowering a casket into the earth. But now they rose. He began with public records, names, corporations, property holdings. Richard Blackwood, the man behind the mask of affluence and philanthropy, on paper. Richard's life gleamed: business tycoon, political donor, charity patron. But Nathan knew better. Power never shone that clean. It cast shadows, and in those shadows, truth hid. He found whispers first. A first wife, deceased under circumstances labeled suicide, but the detective who closed that case retired early on a generous pension. 3 business rivals of Richard's men once. Powerful had fallen from grace, toppled by scandals that materialized from nowhere. The pattern emerged slowly, like bruises blooming beneath the surface. Then his phone buzzed. "Elise, we need to talk." Not at the house. A location followed, a hiking trail nestled far from prying eyes or ears. Her caution spoke volumes. They met beneath a canopy of golden autumn, where the trees stood silent like sentinels, their leaves whispering warnings. Elise looked worn, the silk of her composure fraying at the seams. Her eyes were darker, more hollow. As they walked, boots crunching against fallen leaves, neither spoke until they reached a quiet overlook where the city lay far below. "Unreal and unreachable. Richard called this morning," she said, her voice low. "He's returning tomorrow, not next week. He's never changed plans like this before." Nathan didn't speak. The wind did, rustling the trees like a breath held along. "Do you think he knows about us?" she asked, her voice brittle with fear and something else, resignation. "There is no us," she said before he could answer, a tired, almost mournful smile on her lips. "Not in a way that would threaten him. We haven't even—" She stopped. "But you're still afraid of him." She didn't deny it. Instead, she began to unravel the truth behind her marriage, the truth that lived behind manicured appearances and whispered obedience. How Richard's mentorship had slowly become a form of possession. How his love was transactional, his generosity laced with strings so fine they felt like thread until they pulled tight enough to strangle. After the baby, she paused, her voice cracking. "I wanted to leave, but he made it clear that wasn't an option." Nathan felt something rise in him, a sharp, hot edge. The protective instinct he had buried deep flooding back. What did he do? "Not directly," she said, staring at the valley below. "He doesn't threaten. He demonstrates." She told him about a former assistant, about a sudden divorce, a custody battle, and fabricated evidence that appeared like smoke. Elise didn't need to say more. Nathan understood what kind of man they were dealing with. In return, he shared what he had uncovered, and as he spoke, Elise didn't interrupt. Her face changed slowly from fear to confirmation. She had always suspected, but now she knew. "I've been preparing," she said, "for months, gathering documents, building a safety net. The break-in at the mansion." She looked at him. "They weren't looking for me. They were looking for what I've collected." Nathan's pulse quickened. "And did they find it?" "I beat them to it. I had to. The night I came to the estate, I just discovered Richard had me followed. I had to retrieve something from the safe, something that might protect me if I ever get the chance to leave." Her fingers brushed the edge of her jacket pocket. "But it's not enough. There's more. At his office, files that connect him to everything, to people who should never have power. Nathan should have walked away. Everything inside him told him to run, to protect Sophie, to retreat back into safety. He had fought hard for the fragile life they'd built from the ashes. But as he looked at Elise, her fire, her intelligence, her vulnerability, a different truth settled into him. "Tell me what you need." That night, a plan was born. Elise would play her part, returning to Richard's side, keeping up appearances, pretending everything was as it should be. Meanwhile, Nathan would use his clearance, his resurrected skills, to break into Richard's private office during a charity gala. She provided everything: floor plans, security rotations, even the safe. Combination. Every detail etched in her memory from years of living in a house where trust was a liability. As dusk crept in and their breath turned visible in the chill, Elise reached for his hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You have Sophie. You don't owe me this." "I am thinking about her," Nathan replied quietly. "I want her to grow up knowing some things are worth protecting, that some people still fight for what's right." The words surprised even him. They felt like echoes from another life, a life that hadn't completely died with Megan. Their fingers lingered in a moment without expectation, no kiss, no promises, just a connection, tender, honest, human. The next evening unfolded like a silent heist. While Richard and Elise played their parts at the gala, Nathan slipped into the shadows of Richard's office building. Every move he made was calculated, elegant, invisible. He moved through dark corridors and blind spots like water through cracks inside the office. The safe yielded easily under Elise's instructions. Inside, he found it all documents linking Richard to bribe judges, blackmail operations, and a network of influence that reached into places where power should never be for sale. But buried among the files was something unexpected. Photos of him, of Sophie, months of surveillance, pictures from school drop-offs, grocery store visits, even the cemetery where he'd knelt beside Megan's grave. A sick realization crashed into him. He hadn't been randomly placed at Westlake. He'd been placed, and Richard had been watching long before Elise ever entered his life. Why? The answer came with the ding of an elevator arriving hours ahead of schedule. Nathan froze. The executive floor should have been empty. He gathered the files, wiped his prints, and vanished down a side corridor just as the elevator door slid open. From the shadows, he saw Richard step out, alone, unhurried, like a man checking his trap. Nathan escaped. Barely, but the truth chased him. Their entanglement with Richard wasn't coincidence. It was orchestration. The next morning, Nathan waited in a secluded corner of the city park where they had agreed to meet, but Elise didn't come. His calls went unanswered. His texts read, but UNACKNOWLEDGED. An invisible weight settled on his chest. He drove to the estate under the pretense of duty, masking the rising panic beneath his uniform. At the security office, he made a casual inquiry, one born of habit, not desperation. Black would leave already. The guard nodded. Car pulled out early this morning. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Elise was gone, and Nathan had no idea where or if he'd see her again. Something about this Saturday felt wrong. Nathan sat inside the quiet of the security office, his fingers drumming the console, his thoughts far from routine. He scanned the usual readouts, the digital heartbeat of the Westlake estate, but his focus drifted, tugged by unease. Something was off. Elise hadn't answered his messages. No word, no signal. He considered going directly to the mansion, but that would raise suspicions, trigger surveillance logs, and invite questions. Abandoning his post would alert his replacement. Instead, he turned to what he could control. He accessed the archived security feeds, backtracking through the grainy night vision footage until he stopped. 3:17 a.m. Richard Blackwood's sleek black car rolled through the gate, nodding past Nathan's colleague. The camera captured only the driver's side. The back seat was shrouded in darkness. Too much silence. During lunch break, Nathan veered from his schedule. He drove to Sophie's weekend enrichment program and signed her out early. The girl looked up at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Dad?" she asked, a whisper coated in concern. "What's going on?" "Just wanted to spend the day with you, kiddo," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest. At their modest apartment, he built an alibi. An afternoon spent together, a quiet dinner. He packed a small overnight bag and mentioned they might visit Grandma the next day. Then he made a call to the one person from his old life he still trusted. Marcus, a former comrade turned private investigator. Marcus specialized in cases no one else would touch, the shadows beyond the system. When Marcus arrived, Nathan's urgency was palpable. "I need you to stay with Sophie tonight. Keep her inside. No visitors. Curtains drawn. Don't open the door for anyone." Marcus didn't argue. He studied Nathan's face and saw the man he used to serve with, the one who had been asleep for years. "You're backing it, aren't you?" Nathan didn't answer. Instead, he handed over a sealed envelope. "If I'm not back by morning," he said, "take this straight to Agent Teresa Ramirez at the FBI field office. No one else." As the sun dipped behind the trees and dusk draped its quiet over the city, Nathan approached the Blackwood mansion from the lakeside, slipping through the reeds like a ghost. He knew the terrain. He'd helped design its defenses, and he knew where its blind spots lay. The terrace door gave way with a whisper. The house was lit, but unnervingly quiet, like a museum, pristine, curated, and false. In the study, Richard Blackwood sat as if awaiting a guest, reclined in a leather chair, a crystal tumbler in hand. He looked every bit the monarch in his citadel. "Nathan Miller," Richard said, voice composed and cold. "I was wondering when you'd show. You're earlier than expected efficient, just as your military record promised." Nathan didn't sit. "Where's she?" Richard took a slow sip. "My wife is unavailable. Women can be so fragile when their illusions are shattered." He gestured to the empty chair across from him, a courtesy soaked in venom. "You've gone to such effort to break into my home. The least I can offer is conversation." "I'm not here to talk," Nathan said, fist clenched at his sides. "If you've harmed her," Richard's laugh was unsettlingly genuine. "Ah, Mr. Miller, you still believe you're the rescuer in this tale. That Elise is the damsel in distress." He slid a folder across the desk. "She's not. She's the architect." Nathan hesitated, then opened it. Photograph spill. Out. Him and Megan, smiling in younger, brighter days. Him in uniform, mid-mission. Adrenaline carved into his eyes. Classified surveillance reports. Medical records post-discharge. Even the coroner's report from the night Megan died. "You blame yourself," Richard said, his voice silk over knives, "for not being there, for asking her to drive herself. But your guilt is misplaced." Nathan's breath caught. His world teetered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your wife's death wasn't an accident," Richard replied calmly. "The brake lines were cut. Sloppy work, but effective. A technique your background would recognize." The floor dropped out beneath Nathan's feet. His thoughts fragmented. "No, she was targeted," Richard said, leaning forward, voice dropping, "because of who you were, or rather, who someone wanted you to become." "Elise," Nathan whispered, rage rising like bile. She led me believe." "No," Richard corrected, "not Elise. The people she works for. The same shadow government division that arranged your hiring at Westlake. The ones who've been watching you for years, waiting for the moment when you were broken enough, desperate enough to be useful." Nathan's mind raced backward every encounter, every look, every word. Elise reaching out with empathy, Elise listening when no one else did. Elise giving him something he thought he'd lost, purpose. "She approached me, deliberately." "Of course," Richard said with quiet satisfaction. "You, the grieving widower, decorated veteran, still haunted, protective father, wasting away in obscurity, perfect soil for Elise to sow the seeds of hope and belonging." He stood, crossed to the window, watching the night creep in. "What they didn't expect," he continued, "was that I already knew. Elise and I haven't been husband and wife in any real sense for years. Our marriage is transactional, political, strategic. I've known about her loyalties." At that moment, a door opened. Elise entered. She looked intact, physically, but her eyes carried the weight of an entire war. They had locked on Nathan's, and for a flicker, something vulnerable passed between them. "Tell him," Richard commanded. "Tell him who you really work for." Elise didn't flinch. "I'm part of a government division that doesn't officially exist. We've been building a case against Richard for years: arms trafficking, foreign election interference, judicial corruption." Nathan's voice cracked. "And you needed me because," she hesitated, "because you were already inside. You had access, you had the skills, and the wounds." Richard added with mock tenderness, "Her profile said you'd respond best to empathy, to the illusion of understanding, and it worked." Nathan felt the floor tilt again. The betrayal seeped into every nerve. All of it was calculated. "Not all," Elise said quickly. "The evidence I showed you, what he's done, it's real. That part, I swear. But what she won't tell you," Richard interrupted, stepping closer, "is what her side has done in return. Tell him about Operation Blacklight. Tell him who really authorized the airstrike that killed those children in Rail Province. The operation that made you resign, Mr. Miller." Elise paled. "That's classified. Not from me," Richard snarled. "Nothing is." Nathan stood frozen, each truth shredding his remaining illusions. He had been a pawn, used betrayed from all sides. His wife's death, Elisa's touch, the flicker of hope, all pieces in someone else's game. And yet, her eyes, when she looked at him, there was no calculation in her tremble, no strategy in the way she whispered his name. There was something real to late, perhaps, but real nonetheless. Then came the roar of engines. Black SUVs barreled through the estate gate, headlights slicing through the trees. The monitors flared. The early. Richard observed calmly, "Seems your handlers have accelerated their timeline." Nathan had seconds to choose. He drew his weapon not at Richard, not at Elise, but at the unknown threat speeding toward them. "Where's the evidence?" he demanded. "Nathan, you don't understand. The evidence," he barked out. Elise faltered. "Richard," surprisingly, answered, "Northwest safe room, behind the Monet." Nathan turned to her, heartbreak rising in his throat. "You used me. Let me carry guilt for years. Let me believe I failed Megan, and all along, you knew." "I didn't know at first," she said, eyes glistening. "I swear, not until later, and by then," her voice broke, "by then, it wasn't just an operation anymore." Her gaze does not falter, even with danger crashing down around them, boots pounding the earth. Weapons drawn, chaos unfurling. Elise holds Nathan's eyes, steady and unflinching. The air between them is thick with betrayal, pain, and an unbearable truth. But still, she meets him, not as a manipulator or handler, but as someone waiting to be seen, perhaps for the first time. "Choose now, Nathan," she says, her voice quiet but resolute. There's no middle ground left, and in that moment when illusions have burned away and the machinations of powerful men and hidden agencies lie exposed, Nathan makes his choice. He does not choose Elise. He does not choose Richard. He chooses truth. He chooses his daughter. He chooses a world where no child has to pay for the ambitions of the powerful, where no life is currency for politics or control. It is a choice that demands everything. 6 months later, the world is quieter now. A log cabin perches near the edge of a serene lake, its wooden bones warmed by the late afternoon sun. On the deck, a girl sits cross-legged with a sketch pad balanced on her knees. Her pencil dances lightly across the page, capturing the elegant sweep of waterbirds gliding across the shoreline. "Sophie," she's speaking again, more and more with each passing week. Not always full conversations, not yet. But the silence that once gripped her like a storm has begun to loosen. The words come in soft trickles, gentle and uncertain, like the way spring breaks the ice. Inside, Nathan sits at a rough-hewn table cluttered with folders, printouts, and annotated transcripts. The surface of the wood bears scars, nicks, and burns and rings from coffee mugs, but so does he. The documents spread before him are the threads of a story now unraveling in public view. Classified files, internal memos, and surveillance records evidence of corruption that neither Richard Blackwood nor Elisa's elusive agency managed to bury. The truth, tangled and morally complex, is slowly bleeding into daylight. Congressional hearings, criminal investigations, public reckoning. The cost has been enormous. Nathan's career in private security is over. His reputation is both stained and lionized. Depending on who's telling the story, Richard Blackwood's empire is collapsing, its glossy facade ripped away, though the man himself has vanished into the fortress-like embrace of other powerful men who fear truth more than justice. And Elise, the door creaks open. She enters quietly, arms full of grocery bags, a breeze trailing behind her. Her once impeccable appearance has softened. Jeans, flannel shirt, hair longer and tangled by the wind. There's no makeup, no armor. In this place, she has no need to be anyone but who she is, or whoever she's still discovering herself to be. The Witness Protection Program gave her a new name, a blank slate. But in these rare moments, inside these walls, she drops the pretense. She's talking to the birds now, Elise says with a soft smile as she sets the bags on the counter. Full sentences. Nathan looks out the window. Sophie has crouched by the railing, chirping little phrases as a heron struts by the waterline. A pang catches in his chest, not of sorrow, but something like fragile joy. "I heard," he says. She was naming them earlier. They stand in the hush that follows. So much happened, so much lost. That night at the Blackwood estate still lingers in both their bones. The chaos that erupted, Richard vanishing into shadow, Nathan grabbing Elise and the evidence, their flight through the woods, the safe house, the frantic call to Marcus, the handoff to Agent Ramirez and her team, and the truth. A truth messier than either had imagined. Yes, Richard was guilty. His web of power thick with blackmail, international crime, and untouchable connections. But Elise's agency was no savior. They manipulated Nathan, lied, exploited his grief, used his daughter as a silent bargaining chip, and yet Elise made a choice when it mattered. When the ground gave way beneath them, she didn't run. She stood between Sophie and the bullets. She refused extraction when it meant leaving Nathan behind. She took the stand when it meant destroying what was left of her career and safety. The Justice Department called, Nathan says, breaking the silence. They want another deposition next week. She nods, her shoulders sag ever so, slightly under the invisible weight of every decision that brought them here. Will you ever forgive me? She asks softly. Not the first time. Nathan doesn't respond right away. The hurt still lives inside him, dormant, but not dead. The manipulation, the betrayal, the way she had inserted herself into his broken life, not by accident, but with purpose. But he also remembers the Elise who shielded Sophie with her body, the one who, when the extraction chopper came, stayed behind, the woman who walked away from everything she once served, because she couldn't bear to serve it anymore. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right word, he says at last, his voice thoughtful, but I understand desperation. I understand what it means to make choices that you can't take back, to believe the end justifies the means. He pauses, then adds, I understand what it's like to become someone you don't recognize. Elise walks slowly to the window and watches Sophie twirl barefoot on the deck, her sketch pad abandoned for now. And who are we now? She asks. Nathan joins her, close enough to feel her warmth, but not touching. They are no longer tangled in lies, yet the truth between them is raw and unfinished. There is no neat ending, no kiss, no declarations of love, just a silence that feels earned. We're who we choose to be, he says quietly. From this point forward, they stand there, side by side, watching a child learn to smile again, a girl who lost her voice to grief, now slowly reclaiming it, a family imperfect, unexpected, and forged in fire. This is not a fairy tale. There are no guarantees, just a fragile trust rebuilt from ash, and two souls learning to walk forward one cautious step at a time, one day at a time. Elise murmurs. Nathan nods. And for now, it's enough. This peace, this quiet honesty, this second chance born not from fantasy, but from the hardest kind of truth, the kind that requires sacrifice, confession, and the courage to begin again. It isn't a happy ending, but maybe it's something better, a beginning.